Ni hao. Nice to see you all. I'm very pleased to be introducing Chen here for you this evening. Thank you all very much for coming. It's a pity that we missed term time, so I'm sure there are so many other students who wanted to be here. But yeah, you get twice the value that you have got if it was crowded with students. Now, let me give a brief introduction to what we're doing today, where you will see the remarkable progress that China has made in this area. And I think the best way to tell you is to say that about 7 years ago, 2012, I was invited to go to a corporate meeting by one of the major credit cards, international credit cards. And the CEO of that company talked about future plans, and he was excited to mention that China is where their future would be. He said only 1.5% of the population were using credit cards in 2012. The rest was all in cash, and the economy was growing fast, and it was a market waiting for them to enter and occupy, as it were. Something similar, Jack Ma, who is of course the founder of Alibaba, tells a story when he met the founder of a big American platform, and he told him about his plans for China. The American guy told Jack that he was going to fail because Chinese consumers, he said, are not used to digital platforms and digital payments, unlike the American consumers who were users of credit cards and were already ordering goods online. This was around, I suspect, around the same time, in fact, 2012 or thereabouts. Now, Jack responded that that was precisely the reason that Alibaba would succeed. There was no digital culture to disrupt in China, and Chinese consumers would love it because they spend most of their time on their phones anyway. So they might as well be buying things when they're looking at the phone. The best story I heard actually about China, about how keen the Chinese are on their phones, was not from mainland China, because I've never used subway systems, but in Hong Kong, where they speak English and understand. And as you approach the station to go down to the platforms, there is an announcement that says, "You are now approaching the platform. Please do not look at your phones. Look at the escalator before you go down, and then you can look at your phone again." Anyway, Alibaba proved both the credit card and the platform CEOs wrong. Less than 10 years later from those conversations, China is the most digitalized economy in the world. Alibaba is the biggest retail company in the world, and there are 800 million people using digital payments in China, which is far more, it's a far more penetration of the digital payment systems than in any other country. Now, 3 years ago, at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, Jack Ma, who by that time was a successful entrepreneur, was giving a keynote, and he said the following, which you may have heard him on YouTube, in fact, saying it, that when you make your first million, you're very happy. You can live well. When you make 10 millions, you're really happy because you can make your whole family live well. But when you reach 20 million, the money does not belong to you anymore. Someone gave it to you to help the world become a better place. Now, tonight, you will hear about some of the benefits from that promise that Jack gave 3 years ago. As you may know, Jack Ma started as a teacher of English, and his mission to improve the world is through education. Chen is heading the Luohan Academy, the advanced academic research branch of Alibaba, and financial, concerned with education. And he will talk to us tonight about the impact that digital platforms are having on the economy of China. So please give a warm welcome to Long.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. It's my great honor to be able to here to speak about this topic. The top topic, as you can see, is the digital technology and inclusive growth. And we know that there are a lot of excitement, confusion, and anxiety on how to handle how to embrace and harness technology. Just give you some examples. So earlier this year at Davos, the South Africa's president, Mr. Ramaphosa, he said that we should now have the courage to be ahead of the curve in terms of adopting the digital technology. On the other hand, if you look at the United States, the unemployment rate of the United States is the lowest among the past century right now. But the anxiety over the possibility that AI might replace our jobs is the highest. And another angle, you can see that the word privacy show up in a lot of the discussions. In the past 1 year or so, there are a lot of laws passed, and a lot of discussions have been made on the subject. Even though the mere definition of privacy it's not very clear, and it varies from continent to continent. My point here is that we want to embrace this, but there's a lot of the confusion. And if you look back, actually, this is not surprising. So in the past 200 some years, that how do we embrace and harness technology in an inclusive way, such that it can benefit everyone, the whole society? It's one of the biggest challenge, and it is also provides the limitless opportunities. And this is part of the quote from the mission statement of the Luohan Academy, which actually Chris serves also on the academic committee of the Luohan Academy. So we can see that the world, there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of confusion in this age, and we are trying to help the society to find the right trade-off. As we can see that technology is not only changing the economy itself, it is also changing how research and wisdom is generated. And more, it's not only from the universities. Also, it will be from a hybrid. It's going to be between the best scholars and also the practice insights and big data. Combined, maybe we can try to find the right trade-off. And that was and for the public good. So that is the reason why the Luohan Academy was launched last year. So that just give you some of the introduction. So tonight, I would like to talk about 4 topics. I'm hoping that together that give you a sense of the development of the digital technology in China and its implication for the rest of the world. But let me start with the first topic. So the question here is, what is the nature of digital technology, and what does that mean for economic development, especially for the emerging and the developing countries? But let me start with to talk about the nature of digital technology. A lot we have talked about this, but what are the most important features of the digital technology? I think there are 2 of them. One of them is that digital technology has unprecedented speed of adoption and penetration, according to a report written by the World Bank. Simon, yeah. And so if we look back of the previous technological revolutions, after the steamship was invented, it took about 160 years to reach countries like Indonesia. After the electricity was adopted to use, it took about 60 years to reach Kenya. After computer was created, it took only 15 years to reach countries like Vietnam. And after internet was created, almost instantly it showed up in a lot of the emerging markets. And right now, according to the World Bank, 8 out of the 10 adults in the emerging markets, they already have cell phones. 70% of the bottom 5th percentile of the population have cell phones. So it's very much unlike the previous technological revolutions. The previous technological revolutions were pretty much like a trickle-down approach. developed with some of the richest countries, most advanced countries. But this time, right now, right from the beginning, it has a wide basis. So that is very inclusive. So that's that's the first feature. The second feature is that information is being digitized. What that means is that the cost of the acquiring, storing, processing, and exchanging information is close to zero. And also, sometimes people say that big data is oil. Well, it's not oil, because oil can only be burned once. But big data, digitized information, can be burned 1 million times, unlimited times. So if you think about this, and at close to zero cost, if you think about this, that the digital technology now it has this very wide coverage in many of the emerging markets, and the people can use it. People can produce information, share information at close to zero cost. So those are two striking inclusive features, and that should have profound implications for the emerging markets. And another interesting feature here is that emerging markets have shown much more positive attitude in embracing the digital technology. If you look at this graph here, what this shows, this is a graph from the United Nations survey, and this is it's the GDP. So you can see that actually the emerging markets, the countries with less economic development, they have much more positive attitude of accepting the mobile payment. Countries like China, like Indonesia and India, more than 90% of them actually they like mobile payment. If you compare that with the more advanced countries like in Europe, like France, a bit more than 30%. Japan lower than 30%, and Germany is right here, lower than 30%. So you can see that in the developing countries, they have much more positive attitude, embracing the mobile payment and other digital technology. And this is not surprising, because if you look at the right panel here, right now there are still more than 1.7 billion people who do not have transaction accounts. Of course, many of them are in the emerging markets. So because their current service is not quite available, so they really want to embrace the technology. But if you put the two patterns together, I talk about that, the digital technology is very inclusive, and information is being digitized. Everybody can participate, can generate information, exchange of information. In the meantime, in the emerging markets, actually people embrace the technology much more. If you put this together, you can see that the emerging markets, the developing world, has much bigger opportunity adopting the technology. As a result, you can see that actually the digital technology penetration is not dependent on the level of economic development anymore. So let me give you some concrete examples. That's in China. So this is the left graph, the right side. This graph shows the percentage of the e-commerce as a percentage of the retail sales. And we all know that China has become the second largest economy in the world. But what is much less appreciated is that China has turned itself into a much more digitized economy. It has become the world leader in the past 10 years or so. If you look, you can see here, and this is China. So back just 10 years ago, back in 2009, e-commerce only accounts for probably 1% of the retail sales, but it just took off like this in the past 10 years, and right now it accounts for about more than 20% of the retail sales. What this says is that it has become a macro phenomenon. China's economy is not only more and more consumption-driven, it is actually e-consumption-driven. And that it only took 10 years to change that. So that's this panel shows. Now, if we look at the mobile payment, the progress is even more astonishing. So back in 2011,
China and United States, if you compare their mobile payment amount, there were 15 billion and 8.3 billion respectively. So the pretty small amount comparable. But then after 6-7 years, China's mobile payment amount has exceeded several trillion US dollars, and it's hundreds times of that of the United States. The difference becomes huge. My point here is that because we know China is just only a middle income country, so the point here is that to quickly adopt the digital technology, it doesn't depend on the development of the economic progress anymore. So that is a great news for the emerging markets. And so just now, if you look at these two examples, here I'm talking about trade, and here I'm talking about finance, the payment. And both patterns are important, because if we look at historically, actually, what is this graph shows how the humanity's nature, the fate is being changed. And you can see that back into 1,000 years ago, this is per capita GDP. Nothing changes. Then gradually we have the Industrial Revolution happened right from in England, right, in UK. So then the European countries and the United States and Japan benefit from this. Then gradually it spread over to other Asian countries. So what happened here is after the Second World War, actually a sequence of institutional arrangement were done. That includes the United Nations, including the World Bank, WTO. Together they have created a stable and integrated global market. My point here is that being able to participate in the global market, the integrated market, is crucial to adopt the technology. So that's why back in 2017 there was a report by the IMF. It points out that technology penetration and technology integration and economic integration are crucial for economic growth, crucial for inclusive economic growth. But the economic integration here means the trade and finance integration. So to be able to adopt the technology using in trade and finance are important for inclusive growth. Now, so just now I'm talking about that China has transformed itself in the past 10 years or so in adopting the digital technology penetration. Now in China, there's actually more than 1.2 billion people are using the internet. The majority of them are using the mobile payment. I think many Chinese students here that can verify this for us. And so it's very inclusive, but it's not only inclusive. Digital technology is fundamentally changing the way we do trade. So traditionally, in the past thousands of years, we know that for a company, for a small company, and for the small shops, they can only serve customers probably within 10 kilometers, right? Beyond that, it's very hard to reach your customers. But that is being fundamentally changed. And this is a typical pattern on Alibaba's platform. You can see that, and this measures the distance between the average buyers and the sellers. So the average distance is close to 1,000 kilometers. So the so-called gravity model, which means that the closer the buyers and sellers are, the more frequent they do trades, they trust each other. And also, you can also call this the home buyers, and that is pretty much smashed. Right now, the location is not that important anymore. The average distance is like 1,000 kilometers. That is fundamentally changing trade. And here, if you look at the patterns of the consumers, you can see that what we see here is that this horizontal axis here is the per capita GDP in different regions in China. And you can see that, and this is a percentage of the e-commerce as a percentage of their consumption, of individuals' consumption. You can see that even in less developed regions, actually they spend proportionally no less than the more advanced regions. They're not lagging behind. Not only that, actually in the less developed regions, they spend much more. They spend much more on the varieties. than the more developed regions. And this is not surprising. Imagine if you are in London, then you have a lot of super malls, you have a lot of places to do shopping, right? But in the remote areas, they don't have those super malls, supermarkets. So they make up for the lack of the variety by using the online consumption. So they spend much more on the varieties. And finally, you can see that the consumptions for in the less developed regions, their online consumption grows faster than the more advanced regions. So together, you can see that the consumption pattern is very inclusive. The less developed regions spend no less, and they spend more on varieties, and their growth is faster. Online growth, consumption growth is faster. And that's on the consumption side. If we look at on the supply side, you can see that, and I think it's the first time in human history, and even just on the Alibaba's platform alone, we have more than 10 million SMEs, the startups, more than 10 million SMEs, the startups. And more remarkably, half of the entrepreneurs are women. So the gender gap in offline world doesn't quite exist anymore in the online world, because who knows who's operating the store. And maybe the female have a better sense of the demand. So you can see that it's very steady. Half of the entrepreneurs are women. And not only that, this panel shows here is that even in the digital industry, there tends to be a male or more dominant. You can see the female shares were rising steadily. So you can see that this shows that half of them are women entrepreneurs, and they are gaining strength. So up to now, we've been showing that the digitized information makes a lot of the possibility for the consumers as well as for the startups. Now, that's the power of the diffusion of the information. But a more dramatic example here is you can see this case is called, there's a town in China, it's called Shaji. Okay, so this is a town that was more than 10 years ago. It relies on recycling garbage to have the living. It's a very poor town in China. But in the past 10-some years, you can see that something dramatic happened. So this is the share of the furniture sales in China. So now it has become the largest center for designing, selling, and producing online furnitures. It accounts for about 3% of the China's furniture sales. But it had no manufacturing basis. Now, how could this happen? Well, just more than 10 years ago, there are several undergraduate dropouts. They were local, they went back to the Shaji town, and they decided to sell stuff online. So after a little bit of time, they found that actually they could sell furnitures, self-made furnitures. They were inspired by IKEA. They decided they're going to design their own model to sell it online. And so they had some early success. So their neighbors quickly learned that, wow, we can do this. So they are all lined up to do this. And then a lot of locals heard about news. They moved back to their town. They started design more and produce more. So the whole supply chain was developed. And now there's, if you can read here, I think it says that, now in Shaji there are more than 16,000 online furniture stores. So for every 3 people, they actually have one online store. It becomes the largest furniture producing center for online sales of the furniture in China. So this is the remarkable story to tell what information can change. So up to now, I've been talking about the development on the trade side. Let me talk now, move to the finance side. So this 3 graph here shows the progress on the digital inclusive finance. This is based on the index produced by Beijing University. Now, what we need to pay attention to here is the color difference. So the red color here represents the lowest tier of the financial inclusion. Here I'm talking about, when I talk about financial inclusion, I'm talking about the payment, wealth management, credit, and insurance altogether. And so the red color represents lowest degree of the inclusion, and the yellow color here represents the highest. So back in 2011, it's just 8 years ago, the majority of China were in red area. So it's like in the least developed level of development. And so you can see the most advanced ones like the Beijing, some of the areas in the East Coast, East Coast. So that's back in 2011. Then it just made progress for every 3 years. For now, the red color is completely gone. And you can see that you have the two most advanced colors that pretty much cover China. So the point here is that the less developed regions, they grow faster. That's why the gap is shrinking. It's not expanding. So that's you can show that it has this inclusive feature because less developed regions, it just develop faster. So that together, I was talking about the whole digital finance inclusion. But if we look at payment, in China, I think pretty much any adult you see, they use the mobile payment. And so it's very inclusive. But it's not only more inclusive, it's safe. It's much safer than the traditional credit card. If you compare in the payment industry, the yardstick to measure how safe it is, the measure is called fraud loss rate. How much money is lost because of the fraud. And you can see that if you compare to the similar companies in the United States, it's almost like the fraud loss rate is about 0.2%. In China, for the bank cards, credit cards, debit cards, the average fraud loss rate is about 2 basis points, 0.02%. But if you look at for Alipay's fraud loss rate, and it's not just Alipay, but a good example of it, but our fraud loss rate is less than 0.00005%. And so how could that be? So it's like several scale safer than the traditional bank cards. But how could that be? Well, the idea is very simple. You see, when you swipe a credit card, actually we have no information about who's swiping the card. It could be a dog, could be a monkey or just you or somebody else. Somebody stole your card. But nowadays, if you use the mobile payment, we know precisely who's doing this. Do you own the account? Do you have enough money in the account? Are you making in the right mind, under normal circumstance, making this decision? We have so many more dimensions of information. Because of that, it just becomes much safer. Okay, the idea is very simple. It's the big data is helping to make it much safer. And I can bet, because I've met a lot of people, I've never met a single person in China because of when this person is using the mobile payment, he lost money. Okay, but I think many people had some experience with the credit cards, right? Your number is stolen, this or that. So you can see that the big data, the shared digitized information is helping us to control the risk. So it's safer than the traditional payment method. So it's inclusive, it's safer. It's not only safer, it's actually much cheaper. If we compare with the traditional payment, so in the payment business, the payment company charged the merchants. And you can see that in the United States, they charge about 1 to 3%. Several percent they charge the merchants. In China, we only charge about 0.6%. So one scale lower. It's much cheaper. And that's for charging the merchants. If it is P2P, people to people money transfer, in the United States, they charge more than 1%. And that's why Venmo has become more popular, because it's trying to adopt a free charge method. But in China, it's been free for a while, so among the P2P transfers. So you can see that the mobile payment, thanks to the technology, it's very inclusive, it's safer, and it's cheaper. And because of that, you can see anywhere in China, pretty much anywhere in China, it started from the online, now it's moving to offline. Everybody, the papa and mama stores, they are using mobile payments anywhere. It becomes much more convenient. It's changing a lot of industries, including the beggars industry. So if you look at this gentleman, he's begging for money, but if you look at clearly, he's begging for digital money. So talking about how digital technology is reshaping different aspects of the economy, this seems to be a good example. So this comes to my first conclusion here. So the conclusion here is that digital technology is inclusive in nature, and especially it has special implications for the emerging markets. Emerging markets, they are facing several waves of the technology shocks at the same time. So they are facing the technology revolution, such as the industrialization, electric revolution, the transportation, the computer, and the digital technology. They are all happening at the same time. So what this means is that, as we see in China, that it will be different from the more advanced countries like Europe or the United States. It won't, for these countries, they will finish the industrialization first, then move on to the next waves. And the current institutional arrangement actually somehow blocked the innovation of the digital revolution. But in the emerging markets, they are going through all those things at the same time. They embrace the technology with much positive attitude. So we can see that the emerging markets will experience different growth paths, a different growth paradigm that is potentially inclusive. So my first conclusion here is that digital technology is inclusive in nature. It has the potential for a new inclusive growth paradigm, especially in the emerging and developing countries. So let me move on to the second topic. The question here is, how are digital technologies transforming the micro foundation of the macro economy? So a lot of time when we talk about technology, we kind of understand technology, but we do not quite understand how technology is becoming the engine of the economy. Right? That process, that mechanism is somehow lacking. So I'm trying to share with you some of our observations. So if we look at what is happening here is that actually digital technology is really changing how consumers are making decisions. We can see that the consumers are building themselves, are building a new information and trust system to make the consumption decisions. Let me give you a couple of examples. The first example is online rating. So in online rating here, what it really means is that actually the consumers, they are the producers of this trust system, you see? They rate for each other and they rely on each other to make the consumption decision to see what is more trustworthy. So here, the consumers, they are the producer of a new trust system. And so why can we do this? Because the cost of the generating and sharing this information is close to zero because of the digitized information. Right? So they're building a new trust system to make decisions. And here, this graph here shows that they also build a trust system through the social network. So here is some online stores. It's not big movie stores. It's just somebody people like, you know. They're trying to sell stuff online. And of the sell stuff from Yunnan province, from some niche products, the products people never heard about, okay? So imagine in UK, if you, let's say some people from Northern Ireland, you know, producing some niche products most of us are not aware of, you know, but now there's some people are selling them online. And because you trust those people, you're going to buy it. So what I'm trying to say here is that we are observing a fundamental change, how the consumers are able to build a new trust system. They share the information, and that allows them to make the consumption decisions. It's very different from before. If you think about it, previously we have the producers that produce the products first, then they use the advertisement, the sales is to the seller, right, to the buyer. So it's like more B2C. But now the consumers, they are going to make up their mind among themselves. They're going to build their own trust system. About 2 weeks ago, one of my students in China, he's an entrepreneur. He told me that about 70% of the content, online content that we read, is being generated by the independent media people. So you can see that, and more and more the consumers, they are going to write stuff based on their own liking, their own observations, and they build trust systems. They share with each other. They're going to make the consumption decisions. And this is very different from a traditional model. It's going to be the consumption-driven, consumer-driven, not the producers-driven. It's changing the supply chain. Okay, so the consumers are changing, and the producers are also changing. So here, what I'm showing here is on the Alibaba's Taobao platform, there's a business tool platform. It's called the Chainknow, which means 1,000 ox. Okay, so but what it has is that it is a tool platform that pull together thousands of third-party tool applications together. It ranges, all ranges. It comes from, you have the online information service, IT service, to a lot of business tools such as marketing, commodity management, order management, customer service, cash management, logistic, data analysis, whatever you want to talk about, and business advisor. So what I'm talking about here is that we're seeing a very large scale of coordination between the firms. If you just open up a new firm as SME right from the beginning, you can get the help from a lot of third-party services. So together, it help you to serve the customers thousands of kilometers away. Help you to analyze a lot of the business. So that is you have a new business infrastructure. And another thing it's not showing up here is the cloud computing. In China, if you only need to spend $50, you can enjoy using the cloud computing for the full year. So you can see that a lot of the business infrastructure tools are being democratized. So that enables the SMEs to help them. Those are the abilities where used to be only belong to the big companies. Now it's available to the SMEs. So you can see a large-scale coordination among the companies, SMEs, and you can see that what this graph shows here is that this is right from the beginning when the new companies started, and a huge chunk of them, right? You can see that only about 50% of them are using that Chainknow, the business tool platform, and you can see that just quickly within months that almost all of them are using this. So you can see that the platform is providing the business infrastructure. It enables SMEs. So they have the tools that were only available to the big companies before. So they have a lot of coordination. Another tool here is, we call this the business advisor. So when we think about the big data, we tend to think about the big companies as if the big companies have it, other people don't. Now, if you think about the platform, online platform, that if you just open a store online, you face the challenge that you don't know how to do the business, right? You need to know a lot about the customers, but you don't. So we have something called a business advisor, and using the big data to help the SME to analyze the trends, market trends, this or that. Okay, so you can see that what this graph here shows that is that comparing to the control group, if you start to use the information from the business advisor, your performance just jumped. It's a very clear jump. And this is the power of information. So in information economics, a lot of time we said, oh, information is powerful, but how? And you can see here is that by using the information from this, from the business advisor, your performance just jumped. So this is, give you a concrete idea is how big data can be used to help the companies, a lot of companies on the platform. Now, a third example I give you here is that this is the relation between the producer and the consumers. And becoming more and more, it used to be the B2C, now it's going back all the way around, it's the C2B, it's customer driven. In this particular example, P&G, it developed, 3 years ago, based on big data, it developed a new shampoo, okay? And that it caters to the need of the female users. So they want a particular type of shampoo. And because they have the big data, it took the P&G only 9 months to design and develop and launch this product. Usually it took like 3 times of time to do that. And after this product was launched, then within 1 month, it becomes the sales leader for P&G for shampoo. Okay, so this gives you concrete examples how big data can be used to do a C2B, customer-driven product design. Another fascinating example here is so when we think about online shopping, we have the customers, we have the business, buyers and sellers. But actually, behind the sellers, there's a supply chain platform is being created. And this one example here is this something called Tau Factory platform. What is this? Well, behind the sellers, actually there's a supply chain platform that there are actually more than 40,000 factories that are ready to produce, and they publish their the production cycles. They tell you that we're available during these periods, we produce this or that. So those are the factories. On the other hand, sellers, they can post their needs. So, and if you, let's say in the clothing industry, if you actually order more than, you only need to order 30 pieces of clothes. You can publish your design, and somebody is going to pick it up. Okay, so that is and that has led to explosive growth of the brands, because a lot of people, let's say Chris decided to open a store online for some reason, and then he decides he wants to have his own brand, okay, and then you only need to order 30 pieces of clothes, then somebody's going to do it for you. So that means that enables a lot of sellers without them having their own manufacturing. So largely reduce the production risk. So that, my point here is that behind the buyers and sellers, this is a market, but behind the market, there's a supply chain market. It is changing. It's from the customers driving the business and sellers then driving reshaping the supply chain. Okay, that's a concrete example. Actually, there's another example. It's this company called it's Keyford. Okay, it actually is the company that produced the mascot for the Russia's soccer World Cup. Okay, so it usually took 2 months to do that, but actually it posted the requirement online, and it quickly found more than 30 Tau factories to produce this for it. It only took like 15 days to finish the mascot and ship to Russia for the World Cup. So you can see that. Anyway, the point here is that the way coordinate is being fundamentally changed because of the digitized information. And this is a graph that actually it was produced by several professors. Professor Huang was here earlier, and what this shows here is that for those online companies, actually if you have for those online companies, if you have the financial credit, then your performance has a jump. Okay, so people study finance, usually find it very hard to find the value of finance. So in finance, because I used to be a finance professor, I spent a lot of time the building block of finance is something called the no arbitrage principle, which means we're trying to make money through arbitrage, right? There's no arbitrage. Another principle is called risk and return trade-off. But then, if you think about those principles, you ask the question, what does that mean for the world? You're trying to make money, but what is the contribution of finance? It's not clear at all. As a finance profession, I used to be a scholar. I spent a lot of time trying to think about what's actually the value of finance. But this is a graph shows that for SMEs, if you have the financial support compared to the control group, you're going to have the performance is going to have a jump. So finance has a real impact. Finance is not only available, it will change the SMEs. And I forgot to mention from the earlier graph, so I think it's the first time in human history that not only we have like 10,000, it's on Alibaba's platform alone, not only what we have more than 10,000 SMEs, the startup, but actually they can have the financial support, financial credit, right from the early stage of their startup, which was unthinkable in the industrial age. And those financial support is without collateral. Okay, so it's not collateral-based, it's information-based lending. So they were able to get that kind of service at a very large scale for early stage startups, which really was unthinkable in the industrial age. And they have this business model called 310. It took them 3 minutes to apply, 1 second to get approval, and 0 manual interference. So I think it's a glimpse of the future of finance. More and more financial services will be embedded in the real economy because of digitized information. It changed the traditional banking model. In the traditional banking model, the bankers, they actually have to check the creditworthiness of every borrower, right? Is it creditworthy or not? They have to do this. Well, you don't need to do that anymore because the information is being digitized. So information is right there. And that could be, so it's much more efficient to use the current digitized information to do that. Extreme case is here, it's only takes, as I said, it takes 1 second to get the approval. Okay, you can see that finance is being more and more merged with real economy. And so I in the past several years, I used to be a finance professor, so back in 2014, I left the school. I became the chief strategy officer of the Ant Financial for several years. And we can see that so Ant Financial is a new species in the sense that it was created out of the real economy, even though it's trying to provide financial services. So it's never wanted to provide financial service to start with. So we started with Alipay, if you are familiar with. So Alibaba was trying to do the online trading, right? But then you find that without the online payment, without the Alipay, online trading couldn't take off because the buyers and sellers, they don't see each other. There's a lack of trust. It's not unlike the local market. You pay the cash, you get what you want. Here, you don't see each other. So the buyers will say that unless I get the commodity, I won't pay. And the sellers will say, unless I see the money, I won't deliver. So you can see that there's a lack of trust here, so we created Alipay to solve that problem. So it has this escrow system. So they don't trust each other, but they trust the third party. They put the money into the third party, into the Alipay. And Alipay then tells the seller that, okay, money is here, you can deliver. So they deliver the goods, then the buyers confirm, this is exactly what I want, release the money to the seller. So that's a simple arrangement. So that saw the blossom of both online trading, online shopping, and the online payment blossom at the same time. So that was where the Ant Financial started. You can see that right from the beginning, it was created out of the real economy, out of the real needs. So they go hand in hand. And as we can observe, we can see that in the future, finance will more and more be embedded in the real economy, such that when you need the financial support, financial services, you know right away you need that. In the meantime, because the information is being digitized, you know precisely, you have enough information to process the risk, you know, to assess the risk, you know, to assess whether it's possible to provide the financial service. Okay, so I think that's a good glimpse of the future, one important trend of finance. So put together, what I'm talking about here is that the micro foundation of the economy is being changed. How the consumers are making the decisions is being changed. They're building their own new information and trust system, and the producers, they have a new way of coordinating among themselves. And the relation between the producers and the consumers is also being changed. So I think we're heading into the direction, it's a much more connected economy. It's more, in this connected economy, it has a more ecosystem perspective. So it's ecosystem. So it's not just about the producers, and also about the consumers. They're all the participants. They're all the producers and the beneficiary of the digitized information. You can see that. So that's the ecosystem perspective, and in a lot of cases, platform is in the middle. Platform provides the business infrastructure for this whole thing to happen. Now, let me move on to the third topic. So what's the global implication of this? Now, sometimes people would argue that maybe this is just China. And a lot of times, if we don't understand China, we just say, this is China. And China is difficult to understand. So what is the implication of this for the rest of the world? Well, we do believe that it has a lot of implication for the rest of the world, for Africa, for a lot of Asian countries. If you look, for example, in the past several years, actually, the fastest growing economies are not China anymore. They are actually from Africa, from a lot of the other Asian countries. So in a sense that they are very similar to China 15 years ago. At that time, China's economy grows the fastest and has some kind of lousy infrastructure. So there's no difference. You can see that they face the same challenge and opportunity. Now, but we do think that so the opportunity is there, but to embrace the technology, the opportunity, then we think that there are several important lessons. The first lesson we can come up with for the emerging markets, for Africa, let's say, is that we should really leverage on the power of the low threshold of the digital technology. As I mentioned earlier, that the digital technology is very inclusive in nature. So a lot of the developing world, they already have the basis of this. So we should leverage on that to make people to use it. So when we see, in terms of regarding the technology, there's something called adoption and something else called penetration. They're not exactly the same. Adoption means people started to use it. Penetration means a huge chunk of the population are actually using it. So you have to make that happen. There's a huge gap in between. So, but the digital technology has this, for both adoption and penetration, it has low threshold. We should leverage on that. It means that for a company, for a country, a developing world, they have limited resources. How should I spend money? Well, you can spend money on a lot of stuff, but since digital technology is inclusive, you should leverage on that. You should spend some money on this to make it blossom. It will make the penetration much faster. And as concrete example here, you can see that this is I already showed this earlier, but let's show this again. This is for different countries, and this is the GDP. And this is the e-commerce as a percentage of the retail sales. You can see that there's no relation, pretty much no relation. What I'm saying here is that the digital penetration in is the online, at least in e-commerce, doesn't really depend on the level of GDP. So the emerging markets has a lot of potential to quickly have the adoption. And here is the relation between the mobile payment penetration and the literacy rate. You can see that in Africa. You can see even in many African countries with relatively low literacy rate, the mobile payment penetration could be high, more than 60%, 70%. So you can see that there's a very low threshold of the use of the digital technology, and we should use that. And this is a very interesting graph. So a lot of time we debate, so of course we want people to use the digital technology. So how should we proceed? Should we raise their skill level, education level, or should we reduce the threshold of using the technology? And it turns out that both are very important. Here, well, this is based on the China's household finance survey. Here you can see that this is college and above degree. And here is the primary school. So education level has become lower and lower. And the vertical axis is the average income. Well, here we're talking about the rural startups, the startups in China's rural area. You can see that if you have a lower education, then you have a lower income. But there's another dimension, that is we split, for the same degree, we split them into the ones that have this e-tail households, which means they are involved with the online activity, and the other ones with the non-e-tail, which means they are not involved into the online activity. You can immediately see that if you only have the primary school degree, but if you're involved online, you're pretty much comparable, your income comparable to with the college degree, but you are not involved into the online activity. So which means that education is important, but another probably equally important dimension is to get people involved into the online activity, because they can learn a lot of stuff by doing things, just like that Saji Tang's case shows. And so that's the example in China, but we see actually the similar example in other countries in Africa. The most famous example is Mpesa, in Kenya. Mpesa was another miracle. It took Mpesa essentially just 4 years to have more than 14 million users. And they use the current infrastructure. They don't have very advanced ICT infrastructure, so they use the current infrastructure using the SIM cards, to provide using the basic phones, to provide the payment service. So that helped them to develop very fast. And just now they have more than 30 million people are using their service. So that's another example. The point here is that there are a lot of ways to leverage on the current infrastructure to promote the use of the digital technology. So, and there's something that fits the principle is called the LSE. It means the principle says, it means the low profit margin, asset light, scalable, innovative, and compliance friendly. Okay, and that especially fits the digital technology. So combined together, you can see that for the developing world, it has poor infrastructure. Actually, it should leverage on the strengths of the digital technology because it has very low threshold of use. That's the first recommendation we would like to give. The second recommendation is that we have learned that actually to make these things to blossom, because people continue ask this question a lot. So how come this is great, this technology, how come it didn't blossom yet in many countries? What is lacking? Well, from China's experience, what we have learned is that it needs joint efforts from the public sector and the private sector, and they play different roles. The public sector, what it does is to provide some technological infrastructure, like the ICT infrastructure. In addition, it provides the policy environment to encourage the innovation, to make it's possible to make innovation to happen. So that's on the public sector side. And then on the private sector side, they actually, what we have learned here is that they need to provide the business infrastructure powered by the technology. But let me emphasize here, a lot of time we see this technology. What we do not understand is how come people are not using it? How come it's not as spread in many countries as in China in the past 10 years? So what we see here is that the public sector, we need to have the proper policy and the technological infrastructure environment. But the private sector, what they need to do is actually to build the business infrastructure, just like for example, in Alibaba's case. Alibaba is just one example, okay? But in Alibaba's case, actually, you see that Chainknow business tool infrastructure, right? You have to put all those infrastructure and also including the cloud computing to make it available for all the participants to come in, consumers, SMEs, then start to click, okay? So that is also, that needs to happen. And those things are actually different in, arrangement are different in different countries. In some other countries like India, they actually, e-commerce haven't took off, okay? But then it's mobile payment is spreading really fast. That's based on some other use cases. For example, the offline activities, paying the top-ups, to buy movie tickets, something like that. It's not from e-commerce, but from something else. So the pain point could be different in different countries, but what we do see in common is that the public sector will provide some role. But it's driven by the private sector through the market mechanism, and that's the secret of the success in China so far. So the third lesson we have learned here is that it's very important to have an integrated market, something I have already emphasized. If you look at the regions, different regions in China here, you can see that less developed regions, I already mentioned this, they spend proportionally no less than the more developed regions. But the prerequisite here is that it's integrated domestic market. Smaller province, biggest province, are integrated through the technological infrastructure. And if you look at this is in China, across regions, but here, across the countries, it's a very similar pattern. So smaller countries, this is the population. So the smaller countries, they could have the same development as the more advanced countries, but then you could have the cross-border trades or that, right? So that's the point. The point here is that in Africa, we know there are a lot of the small countries, economy is very small. I think they could leverage on the integrated market. You need to be able to participate in the integrated market to be able to absorb the technology. And especially nowadays, because of the digitized technology, that makes the integrated market much more possible. So that is the third recommendation. Now, let me move on to my last topic. So I've been talking about what we observe in China is that because the digital technology is inclusive in nature, because information is being digitized, that is generating a lot of interesting patterns, good things. But of course, digital technology not only generate good things, it also generates a lot of problems, right? We have to talk about the problems, otherwise you're only talking about one side of the equation. So we need to talk a bit about some of the unintended consequences and how should we deal with it. Well,
some time for questions as well. Watch it.
Okay. So 2 minutes, yeah.
Oh, you can take 5.
I'm almost done. So here, the first issue here I'm talking about here is the privacy and the data governance. It's one of the most important issues nowadays. And for here, I'm talking about a lot of the positive side of this. We see that the sharing of the personal data, it is a resource. It's like a new production input, right? It generates a lot of the new patterns I've been talking about. So that's if you think this as the production input resource, but on the other hand, personal data is privacy, right? Then you want to protect the privacy. So it's a trade-off. Now, you can see that if we observe globally, you can see that not everybody sees privacy the same way. For example, actually last month, Luohan Academy held a conference on privacy and the data governance in Hangzhou. And we invited a lot of people. It's cross-discipline in the sense that we invited economists, lawyers, and regulators, practitioners. It's also cross-continents, people from Europe, even people actually involved into the GDPR, and people from US, people from China, from the Hong Kong, from Singapore. And when they are together, they learn, everybody walk away, they learned a lot because they see very different perspectives. They see that, for example, we realize that GDPR, the principle, is based on the privacy principle. But this principle was developed way before the digital age. It take the privacy as a human right, right? We should have the human right. But I think one problem of that is that in the digital age, we suddenly find that sharing of the information is a really important resource, generate a lot of opportunities. So that is a trade-off. But the GDPR, relatively speaking, is more principle-based, less trade-off based. So, but if you look at other continents, for example, United States or China, it's relatively more trade-off based. I'm not saying any of them is the perfect, but you can see that they have different angles to deal with issues. And so all the participants learned that they were humbled. They learned that we need to be more humble, more open, because you see, even the definition of the privacy is different in different culture, in different stage of economic development, in different continents. So then we need to be open and somehow humble. There's no single system here. Now, but even though we have disagreement, we do see that there are certain principles we do agree. For example, we agree that in the collection stage, that the data should be, collection of the data should have limitation, should have specific purpose, and when you're using it, you also should have transparency, certain limitations, it should be secure, right? And so, and also whoever have the data should have certain responsibilities. So those are the principles all continents kind of agree. Another point here is that you can actually combine the technology with those principles to have to deal with the life cycle of data. For example, in the initial stage, when you are acquiring the information, it should be authorized. And at the storage stage, before anybody can use it, it could be desensitized. It hides the sensitive information. It could be encrypted. So if somebody steals the data, they don't know how to use it. And then in the user stage, it has certain principles. And finally, you can delete the data. There's the right to forget, things like that. So you see, there's certain set of principles combined with the technology. It can mitigate a lot of the concerns. And actually, there's more technologies coming up that can, so technology create opportunities, problems, but it can also create solutions. Here, there's a technique called multi-party security computation. What this says is that now, if let's say two parties, they want to merge the data to find new patterns, find solutions, they can do that, but not really sending each other data. They put the data into certain space, and they can merge the data together to find the solution, but one side doesn't get the other side of the data, and you cannot trace back the data. So it's like zero information technology. Okay, so things like that can solve a lot of the concerns. You don't send the original data anymore, right? So that's I'm just giving you an example to show that technology gives you solutions. So that can presumably give you this effect that it knows you. Big data knows you, but do not know who you are. Okay, so you're like a familiar stranger. And that has to be the case. Otherwise, in the big data age, if our privacy has to be invaded from time to time, there's no way to develop. I'm almost done. I think employment, just a couple of graphs. Here, what this shows is that, another thing, of course, we worry about a lot is about the employment. We're worried about AI will replace our jobs. And so, but what we have learned repeatedly in the past 200 some years is that digital technology, the technological revolution is creating a lot of jobs, right? Because this is a population. The global population has grown like 7 times in the past 100 some years. But most of the people do find jobs. So the population is rising, but the unemployment rate is somehow steady. So it's not really, it's able to create a lot more jobs. And if we look at the countries with the more advanced automation or digital technology, the unemployment rate is not higher. So the point here is that we don't know how much AI will replace the jobs. It's yet to be seen. What we know so far is no different from the theme in the past 200 some years. That is the technology, it causes the changes, causes uncertainty. Chris is the leading expert in the world on this subject, but we do see that it creates a lot of more opportunities. It's still the case. Okay, I'm done. So here,
10 slides later.
the point here is that if we think about the logic of digital technology, it's very inclusive because it has very low threshold of use. A lot of emerging markets, a lot of people have certain access to it, and also the information is being digitized. People can store and share information at very little cost, and so that creates the patterns. It could have potentially for a new inclusive growth paradigm, especially for the emerging markets, and it's changing the micro foundation of the macro, changing how consumers making decisions, producers coordinate among themselves, and how the producer and the consumer interact with each other. And we believe that China's experience is having implication for the rest of the world, for Africa, for the other emerging markets. To do that, we believe that they need to leverage on the power of the low threshold. They need to have the joint efforts by the public and private sectors, and also they will benefit from integrated market. And finally, we have to manage unintended consequences, but at least we should start with separating the hypothesis from the facts. A lot of times we see people making conclusions, jumping right from the hypothesis to the conclusions. I stop here. Thank you very much. And so this is the...
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, and it's so refreshing to hear a whole lecture without any mention of Brexit as well. We have time for questions. So, and I see I'll take, since you're the closest, and then the one behind.
Thank you for sharing. I'm Janet Wong. I'm an alumni of LSE MPA program, Master of Public Administration, now working for Hermes Investment Management. Very interesting discussion, especially for the last section. You mentioned that these days people have excitement, confusion, and anxiety about all these changes, this new technology, and really love your discussion about data privacy, but say in terms of data governance and ethics. I think in the past 12 months, different regulators, different governments from the US, from Europe, UK, Singapore, Asia, they're all calling for stronger AI principles and governance. So I think, say, from this perspective, what can companies do to ease our anxiety and to ease people's confusion? Because I believe that AI governance is not only related to data privacy in terms of big data, but say, for example, in terms of credit scoring, I think there has been some debate, especially in the United States, about how data scientists analyze data and whether there would be resulting in negative and negative discrimination against a certain group of people. So, thank you.
Thank you. Let's take another question, 2 or 3 before we ask them together.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for that lecture, very interesting. I'm Christy Lowe, I'm from the Overseas Development Institute, I'm a researcher there in the social policy team. And yeah, I was interested in, when you went on to the last challenge there, talking about loss of jobs, fear of loss of jobs. I think it's also fear of loss of employment standards or failure to uphold those employment standards maybe in places where they hadn't necessarily been upheld before. In the supply chain, you spoke about the benefits for the consumer, the benefits for the business owner, but obviously there's also all the laborers behind that supply chain. And I'd be interested to know how do you think we can, and where does the responsibility lie in promoting a gig economy that also shares those opportunities with the laborers?
Okay, thank you. Let's take one more, and gentleman here front.
So hi, I'm David. Firstly, thanks for the amazing lecture. I'm a first-year undergrad at LSE. So my question is more related to the employment issues and the cooperation between public and private sector as well. So the reality in Chinese economy right now is that the online retailer platform have, if not entirely destroyed, but pretty much crashed the traditional retail platforms in the sense store and mall. So what creates incentives for public sectors to work with private sectors, such as Alibaba, in foreign countries to push for further technological integrations in their economy? And how would the government to adapt to these loss of employment?
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to give answers, but brief, because I see many other hands, and we have about 10 minutes.
I already forgot the first one.
First one was about what can companies do to protect the information you have about AI and governance.
I think what's probably most important now is to know we need to know the right trade-off. So I spent a chunk of the time, because I came from the emerging market. I'm just trying to tell you that technology can do a lot of things to help a lot of the poor people, less developed regions to have the opportunity they never had before. So that is the one side of it. The problem, the chaos, the confusion nowadays in the world is that different continents, countries, they try to protect the people, but they have very different angles. So we do need to know the trade-off. You don't want to miss the opportunity. As I said, especially in the emerging markets, you want to embrace this, but then you don't want to hurt people. Then what is the right trade-off? So, and that's really the purpose of our report, of research, to promote, to at least help the society to understand the right trade-off. We understand the potential problems, but we need to understand both sides. The more we understand right trade-off, the better we can make the right decision. Let me jump to the third question, retail. Actually, if you look at the statistics in China, the retail sector in the past 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, they're rising. And they're also creating more job opportunities, such as for example, the logistic, in China. There are a lot of largest people try to send a lot of stuff. And also, if you go, I didn't have time to do this. In fact, it creates a lot of new jobs, because in the online, you need people to do marketing, to do a lot of stuff, design, the jobs that never existed before. So, but this has to be the theme all the time. So my point here is that the fact is, let's talk about the fact. The fact is that if you look at the retail, people working in the retail business, they're increasing. And there's more jobs being created. But I agree with you that there's disruptions, in a sense, to some of the traditional ways. But that's the theme of the technology revolution, the past 200 years. That's how England, UK become the most powerful country 200 years ago. We adopt the technology. We try to handle the unintended consequences. That's the trade-off. We don't just look at one side of this. The second question, gig opportunity for job. I think I somehow answered this because we see a new form of coordination among the producers on the platform. It creates a lot more jobs and a lot of more people that don't work for the big companies anymore. So they just it's just like the sharing economy. So it produces a lot of these opportunities. So there's some problems. We have to talk about better, for example, social protection or other stuff to make it better. But this is almost like the inevitable trend. So there's new coordination. And so, yeah.
There was a question here, and then one behind there, and one here.
Thank you, Professor. That's a really fascinating speech. And I know Jack Ma is very passionate about education, and we talk a lot about how AI is going to transform or impact on our society in general. So I wonder if maybe in the future there can be more grassroots, like training and maybe internship, work experience shadows, for like very young age students to maybe goes into Alibaba to experience how AI might be able to impact on their, daily life, in all kinds of different ways. And maybe that can start all the way from, I don't know, maybe primary school all the way up, because I thought AI is
Jim Heckman should start from age 1 to 3 is the most effective. So maybe we should have a nursery at Alibaba.
Why not? Maybe that's something you can talk to Jack Ma about. I think that would be quite exciting.
We are.
Let's take
take two questions. Okay.
Right behind me.
Yes.
No, behind at the very back.
Thank you. Just a quick question on credit rating. The speed at which you do it, it seems like you're not doing the same process quicker. It almost feels like you've got a new paradigm. And I'm just wondering if that opens it up to people who would otherwise fail a normal credit rating in the old style. Is there a different paradigm that's being used?
You have the mic. Yeah.
Thank you, professors. I'm from Confucius Institute, and my question is, just you mentioned, gravity model does not work at all because geographical distance does not counter. But my question is, will the intangible distance, for example, trust, cultural differences influence the new model of networking business model? And if that is really a reason to deter the network building and the promotion of model, how could we change the cultural distance by using big data? Thank you.
Okay, so education at Alibaba.
Actually, nowadays, we already have there's something called Taobao University. So it's actually has a lot of online trading to help the entrepreneurs to learn a lot of stuff. In the beginning, it started with those Taobao forums. They teach each other how to do open online shops, just do that. Then develop into this Taobao University. So we provide a lot of online training. So that's how they started. That's how 10 million SMEs come up. So learn by doing. There's also a lot of online training courses. Earlier education. I think the training is there, and it's not so long as there's a demand. Actually, it's already somehow it's getting to be there. But it's an interesting question. But actually, let me give you one example because I have another student. He's doing very fascinating things about training starting from the primary school kids. And so what this guy does, he used to do the offline training. So he had a lot of schools all over the place in China. But then he wants to move to online. He learned a lot of models like the Coursera's, others. He learned the failures. So what he managed to find in the past several years is to separate teaching from the TA. So he has the stars to do the teaching, but then he has a lot of the offline schools to do the TA part. And because that is especially pertinent for the remote regions, less developed regions, because they couldn't find any good teacher. But it's much easier to find the good TAs. By doing this online-offline combination, it's developing very fast. So this is just giving one example. So I see
and they are using the AI. They have this fascinating video. The other day I saw it. So you see, they're teaching the kids, and the kid answer the question. They say, "Okay, Peter, you are right." I say, "It's great," things like that. But actually, it's not a live one. So actually, it can learn. It quickly learns. It has different answers. To depends. It can call the student's name and provides the right answer. So based on the AI. So anyway, I hope that's one example.
Credit rating.
Credit rating. That's the gist of this. So I think the finance industry is a very B2C industry. It doesn't serve the customers very well up to now. And the majority of the SMEs, a lot of individuals do not get a good service because of the asymmetric information. And we do see that because we have so many more dimensions of information, now we are able to overcome the challenge of that. So that's precisely for that reason, so many SMEs, they can get the credit at a very early stage, and it's a non-collateral credit. And so I agree in the sense that it's finance is the information-based industry. We have so much more information. It is fundamentally changing how we get information and make risk decisions. So I agree with you. It's kind of it's fundamentally changing this area. And finally, trust. It's so interesting. We can see that because of digitized information, actually every product, every process, every person is gaining a digital identity. So that's how you can see that in an online platform, you can have hundreds of millions of people as if they are in the same room, seeing each other, they're trading. They are buying and selling stuff from each other as if they know each other, but they don't. But the key point here is that it's using the data, using the efforts of the customers to build the digital identity for everything. And also, now we're also having the blockchain technologies coming in. So all these are helping to build the identity such that it builds the new trust system. But there's always something that it's hard to measure, it's hard to trust. It's always there, but we can see that the technology is already lowering the gap, to shrink the gap. But there's still a lot of things. It's very hard to measure, and it needs trust. Yeah.
That's very good. I think we should stop. I have a quick question for you. Is that really your slide, or was it inserted by my LSE colleagues without your knowledge?
That's my slide because.
Can you explain why you should remain a leader? You mean?
UK is the origin of the Industrial Revolution. Of course, we know that, but we see that the fascinating thing about the technological revolution is that it needs the suitable institutional arrangement to absorb the technology. But it tends to be the case that the old arrangements, the incumbents, tends to resist the new changes. So, it's that gives the newcomers the opportunities. So it's hard to be the original leader, but continue to be the leader. I surely hope that England, UK can be the leader in this age.
Well, you've earned your dinner, I think, now. So warm applause.
Thank you very much.